Hello, everyone. I am Rosa Maria Castañeda with the Annie E. Casey Foundation. Welcome to today's webinar. This particular webinar series is part of a body of work the foundation has been advancing and supporting for a number of years, recognizing the sizable and growing share of low-income, mixed-status families with kids, the significant share and millions of children of immigrants, that we must do better to adequately adapt programs and policies to yield economic opportunity for the parents, who are a growing share of the workforce and many of our nation's essential workers, alongside improving child well-being and family stability. And there's an exciting mix of programs across the country who are demonstrating promising models and good results, some of which we'll hear about today. And frankly, doing this work in spite of disincentives built into current policies that we must also address. The good news is I hear there are over 600 of you who signed up today to this webinar, pointing to really high demand and a strong desire to do better. At Casey, we are in it to strengthen the field of practice, as well as shine a light on the importance of improving policy to reach more kids and families with adequately designed program models. I hope throughout this series, you'll find something useful, whether you sit in an early care program, education or workforce program, adult ed program, or other human service programs. I also hope we have an opportunity to reflect on and interrogate and refresh, what do we mean by two-generation work, so that it includes and encompasses all of our nation's families, and it also advances racial equity. Of course, these are not normal times. We're still in a pandemic, and both the pandemic and the recession have helped us see who are the nation's essential workers, who doesn't have broadband, whose kids are missing from classrooms because they lack digital literacy or parents don't know how to use technology, who doesn't have adequate health care, et cetera, et cetera. And as a foundation, we are committed to addressing these racial and ethnic inequities. Again, I hope you'll see practical lessons and tactics to help you do your best work in these difficult times. I want to thank our partners at Aspen Institute Community Strategies Group, Migration Policy Institute, and Ascend, best in the field folks to work with to bring you this programming. And I have the pleasure of turning this over now to Chris Estes, Associate Director at Community Strategies Group, who's going to moderate today's panel. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rosa Maria. Really appreciate you being here today with us, and for you and Annie Casey's support of our work and with immigrant families in particular. Next slide. So today is the first in a four-part series looking at different issues organizations raised when we surveyed them and did interviews with folks we identified as having promising practices this past spring and summer. I want to make note that we have 3 upcoming that follow this, and note the titles and dates: Working with Immigrant Status on September 16th, Growing Language Skills on October 14th, and Cultural Competence Secrets to Success on November 10th. You can register for the entire series via the link in the chat box, or with individual issue opportunities that fit you best. Next slide. So following each of the webinars, we'll be having a peer advising session. And so on August 26th, we'll be having a peer advising session on building trust. These peer advising sessions are opportunities for you to submit a question related to a challenge you are having, in this case related to trust building. We'll choose 2 or 3 questions that will get direct dialogue with our presenter teams that you'll be hearing from today, as well as engagement with the larger audience of folks who wish to participate. You can submit your question in the chat box. The deadline to submit is Monday, August 16th. And each of the upcoming sessions will also be followed by peer advising sessions on those issues. So we hope, if you're interested, this is a great additional way to participate and get some direct feedback to challenges you and your organization are working on. Next slide. So we wanted to make note that to maximize time, that we're not doing extensive speaker introductions, but the bios for each of our speakers and any shared resources that we discuss today will be on the Aspen CSG website, as will the video of this event. All of you who registered for this webinar will get a link. We also want to encourage both awareness and dialogue about these issues, so please share insights and thoughts on this event via Twitter and LinkedIn using these tags that are on this screen. So to participate in today's event, there are two features that you may be used to from other Zoom webinars. You can use the chat box to share insights, share thoughts, and support points that speakers are making. We hope it goes without saying that to do so civilly. And use the Q&A box to ask questions for the speakers. And just to note that Q&A will happen in the final 25 minutes of the webinar. So why are we focusing on building trust? As I noted, it was a strong theme that came out of both our survey of interviews of practitioners working with immigrant families. It is critical to effective services and success and long-term progress with families to build trusting relationships. We know that immigrants are a significant part of our population growth and are significant economic drivers for the country, and their inclusion and support is critical to our long-term success. We also recognize that there is significant hostility and resistance to immigrants that can create barriers to accessing services. In particular, the dialogue in recent years has grown more sharp, and so we are eager to find and support ways to increase people's success in working with immigrant families in particular. It's now my pleasure to introduce my Aspen Institute colleague, Sarah Haight, who is the Associate Director for Network and Outreach for Ascend. Ascend is the leading organization in developing and supporting the field of two-generation services. Sarah?
Thanks so much, Chris. Really appreciate that introduction. And thank you, a special thank you to Community Strategies Group for all of the work you've done in the two-generation field, not just with regards to this particular body of work, which is so important, but over the last 8 years in partnership with Ascend. And a special thank you to Rosa Maria, who's been a really strong advocate and supporter, not just for the two-generation approach, but really with a lens on communities of color and immigrant communities. So thanks to you both. I'm Sarah Haight, and I'm going to just do a short overview of what we're talking about today, which is the two-generation approach and what we mean by that in this context. Next slide. So the two-generation approach at its heart is really about focusing on building family well-being by intentionally and simultaneously working with children and the adults in their lives together. And as you'll see from this slide, there are a lot of organizations and policies that may start from a child-focused perspective or an adult-focused perspective. And the goal with these approaches is really to integrate elements that can help serve and support and recognize the strengths of whole families. And I'll talk a little bit later about the implications for some of the language we're using here, in particular in the context of immigrant families. Next slide. You'll see here the two-gen core components, and historically we've had 5 core components for two-generation approaches, but we've recently added a 6th component. You can see that here in the K through 12 space. So these are all cogs in a broader machine, which is the two-generation approach. And I'll just note, for early childhood education, this is really a fundamental core component of these approaches, recognizing the various platforms from home visiting to family friend and neighbor care to Head Start and early Head Start that help children thrive, as well as post-secondary and employment pathways for the adults in their lives, ranging from education and training to workforce partnerships and community college. K through 12 is a relatively new component. We're still building the evidence for how and where this fits into this approach, but we recognize that, just because a child transitions out of early childhood and moves into an elementary school setting does not preclude their entire family from utilizing and needing resources for the whole family. These other three, economic assets, we see this as critical for helping a family move up an economic ladder, and it can take the form of child savings accounts, the earned income tax credit, and childcare subsidies, as well as access to transportation. Health and well-being, and I'll talk a little bit more about how critical this component is, especially right now, really looking at resources to mitigate the impact of toxic stress, access to adequate healthcare coverage, not just services themselves, and recognizing the tremendous impact that behavioral and mental health have on these other components. And then finally, this last one, and you've probably, those of you who are familiar with Aspen's work have heard us refer to this as the secret sauce, but social capital. So the research we know that recognizes how cohorts, being in community, having trusted connections, both to institutions and individuals, helps all of us, regardless of economic background, thrive. And I think this particular one is important because there's a lot of organic social capital developed in communities, particularly immigrant communities, that we need to lift up and recognize as a huge strength and help integrate into these other systems. Next slide. I won't speak to all of these, but these are just some of the evidence points on the previous components. So why some of these components around early childhood, post-secondary education, and how they make an impact in a family's overall trajectory. We also know the brains of new parents undergo major changes. So from a health perspective, how do we harness that to recognize that new parenthood is a window of opportunity, and that's applicable not just to biological mothers, but also to biological fathers and non-biological adults in children's lives. It's about that attachment, not just the biology. Next slide. The last part of this component, or this phase of my remarks, is really just to acknowledge a lot of organizations say, we believe this is the right approach for our work. How and where do we start? And these principles are designed to be a roadmap and a starting point. So measuring and accounting for outcomes for both children and their parents. Dual outcomes are really at the heart of these approaches, and programs and policies should try and measure how well they serve the whole family. Our report, Making Tomorrow Better Together, details more on this. Engaging and listening to the voices of families, really centering parent perspectives and expertise. Ensuring equity, this is critical. It is central to these approaches, really looking at how to evaluate and fix structural problems that create gender and racial and ethnic disparities, and really looking at things like the racial wealth gap in developing these approaches. Fostering innovation and evidence together. So how can policies and organizational cultures encourage the integration of innovation into emerging evidence? And then lastly, aligning and linking systems and funding streams. And I know Margie will talk about this later, but rarely will a single funding stream fully address all the needs of children, parents, and families. So blending and coordinating funds to deliver 2-gen services. So that's a short overview of what this approach looks like. We have a lot more resources that I know Clifford is putting into the chat. Chris, I was going to share some lessons and opportunities. I don't know if you want to frame some of that or have me go into it now.
Sure. I think one particular question was around the lessons of applying a 2-gen approach to programs serving immigrant families over the last decade or so.
Sure. So I think there's 4 big lessons, and these are really illustrative, not fully comprehensive. But the first I would say is the importance of language and really thinking about this as a whole family, multi-generational frame. We recognize that families look different in different communities, and that frankly, the term 2-gen is imperfect. But we use it to capture the essential aspect of this approach, which is that it's about serving the child and the adult in that child's life together, recognizing though that in many communities, especially Indigenous communities and communities of color, approaches that see and support the whole family are critical. The second lesson, I think, is really the importance of creating on and off ramps for families with flexible timelines for workforce development and training. We know that in some 2-gen programs like CAP Tulsa, for example, the stackable credential training programs for parents take more time than was initially expected. Parenting, maintaining economic stability, increasing education and training, this is really hard work. It is not a linear process. So I think for programs, it's really important to build in flexibility and on and off ramps for caregivers and parents. The third lesson is really around accessible, culturally competent mental health treatment and supports. So I'm a clinical social worker by training, and I'll be honest, my field work took place in 2 leading direct service settings in a major metropolitan city, but it did not 10 years ago include rigorous examination of racial inequity, unconscious bias, or the implications of white supremacy and the racial wealth gap on mental health treatment and delivery. So I think it's really critical that organizations not just provide mental health supports, but do so with a rigorous examination of racial equity and include an audit of the language that's used with and behalf of families, many of whom are very sensitive to stigmas around mental health. And I think this also includes a focus on increasing access to the Child Health Insurance Program, which we know as CHIP, that really helps ensure that as many families as possible have access to mental health supports. And then the last lesson I would say is that really the whole family approach, I think, does work to build trust and strengthen relationships within families, in part because parents will do for their children what they often won't do for themselves, but parents also have aspirations and goals. And when organizations help parents themselves feel seen and heard by the systems that are designed to support their child, that appears to build a lot of trust. And I think some of the program leaders you'll hear from today can speak to that.
Thanks. And I wanted to highlight, you referenced sort of cultural competency within your remarks, and that is one of the major themes that we've outlined in our study and our survey. And there will be upcoming webinars that'll dive into that more deeply, but you will hear some of these themes throughout the 3 speakers. So looking ahead, what do you see as the greatest opportunities for immigrant serving programs focused on better outcomes for families?
Yeah, and I think that there's 3 opportunities that are top of mind. And I think to a certain extent, these are opportunities that are applicable to the whole field, but I think they're especially applicable to organizations and programs that are focused on serving immigrant families. And the first is really related to the principles that I just shared, but really thinking about how to track outcomes for children and the adults in their lives together. And I think this is critical both for sustainability as well as building the field. So my colleague Marjorie Sims has led work around, as I mentioned, Making Tomorrow Better Together, which is a guide on identifying child, parent, and family outcomes, I think to strengthen the field, but also for individual organizations to really have a path to sustainability with these approaches. It's critical to have a game plan to track these outcomes. And that is often through partnerships. But I think having a strategy in place for tracking outcomes for whole families is very important. The second is related, Chris, to what you just noted, but I think really strengthening culturally competent mental health services and addressing trauma. The COVID-19 pandemic has just made obviously incredibly evident how critical mental health is, but I think it's also exacerbated trauma and challenges faced by parents, especially those of color and those with low incomes. And I think that from a 2-gen perspective, it's not enough to just offer mental health referrals. Organizations must think through the culturally competent mental health services either they are able to offer or partner on, the type of trauma-informed training staff receive, and the racial equity focus and action, not just lens, that's being applied to addressing the needs of families. And I think this is critical for trust building as well. And then I think the third big opportunity is really centering parent stories, centering parent stories in the work you do with funders, with your board, with your partners, and really highlighting the strengths of parents and families. Families with low incomes are incredibly resilient. We have a significant opportunity, I think, to center their expertise, to compensate them for that expertise and their insights, and really look at what it means to transform or update a program or policy based on what we hear from parents themselves. And I think it's timely, it's difficult work, but I do think it will increase trust among clients and constituents when they see their voices reflected back in practice and policy change. I'll just share to close that we have a network partner that had designed a 2-gen pilot, but had not built in resources for multilingual translation. They did not have the recruitment uptake that they anticipated for this pilot, which was an early childhood and workforce development partnership. And so they went back to listen to their families, many of whom are immigrants, as part of a focus group after the pilot was launched. And as a result of what they heard from families, they actually reallocated resources to make sure that they had a Mandarin speaking coach on staff. And as a result, they saw a significant increase in applications. And I think this is really instructive because it's a reminder that trust is both given and earned, right? And programs in particular need to build that listening muscle and then demonstrate that they will implement what they hear.
Thanks so much, Sarah. As someone who started in an early childhood program in North Carolina and then went on to get a master's in social work, it's great to see how these family-centered themes of MSW practices has really been a part of and central to the building of the 2-gen field that you are now implementing, and how it's continuing to evolve with understanding more about how to serve immigrants. You will hear a lot of the themes that Sarah talked about in our upcoming 3 case studies. And so we're going to dive into that. But thank you for being here today, Sarah. If you want more information, you can visit Ascen's website at the Aspen Institute website, and her contact information will be shared at the end of the webinar. So thank you. So it's now my pleasure to bring on Felipe Pinzon, Executive Director of Hispanic Unity of Florida. Felipe?
Thank you, Chris, and the Aspen Institute and Ascend for this opportunity to present the great work that Hispanic Unity has been doing over the years. And of course, for the continued support that Sarah and everyone else at Ascend have, provided to Hispanic community, technical assistance, and so much more knowledge and information that has been used to enhance and improve our service delivery model. A little bit about Hispanic community of Florida. Our mission is to empower immigrants and others to become self-sufficient, productive, and civically engaged. We are a mid-sized nonprofit, over 200 staffers, and we are located in South Florida, but our offices are in Broward County. For those who are not familiar with South Florida, we are right in the middle of Miami-Dade County and Palm Beach County. Our primary services and programs are in 3 core service areas. One of them is civic engagement. We provide U.S. citizenship education, naturalization preparation assistance, voter registration, and legal assistance as well. We also have several programs under education, including our early childhood education program, English classes, our family strengthening, and a year-round youth development program. We also have programs under the economic development area, including access to income supports, whether it's the SNAP benefits or access to primary health care services, free tax preparation, vocational training, employment coaching, financial coaching and training, and our housing services. In addition, we also provide a small business ownership, education, and training as well. And all Hispanic communities programs and services are further supported by local, state, and national public policy and advocacy efforts. Want to give you also, some background about Broward County. We are about 1.9 million residents. 30% of those residents happen to be Hispanic, but a little bit over that, about 35% are immigrants. So besides Hispanics, we have in Broward County many residents that come from the Caribbean and other countries. that are not from South America and Central America. 43% of the households in Broward County speak a non-English language at home as their primary language. Our clients, the ones that actually come to Hispanic community, we serve everyone, but when it comes to immigrants, most of them are from South America. We also serve immigrants from Central America, the Caribbean, and Europe. Most of them are newcomers. Most of them do not speak the language. Most do not trust systems of government agencies for several reasons, and I could share some of those reasons with you today so we can start talking about building trust. Immigrants in many cases are not eligible for many public benefits and other services. This is one of the main reasons, by the way, some or many immigrants do not trust the systems or some government agencies. And it's because oftentimes they are rejected, their applications are rejected, they don't receive the services, they are not eligible for services. And by the way, sometimes the nonprofit sector is part of that issue. I will share with you how Hispanic community has tried to overcome some of those systemic barriers. Families share with us that some of these organizations have no one that speaks the language. They do not feel welcome when they ask for services or support. And they are immediately actually referred to other organizations, websites, etc. So what we have done over the past 40 years is to become an integral part of the Hispanic community in Broward County. I believe we communicate with immigrants, not at them. So, and what I mean by that is that we listen, we care, we connect. And to be very specific about how we do it, we have created across the board, we provide services at about 40, 50 locations. This is, of course, pre-pandemic, where we provide citizenship classes and all the services that I mentioned before. But we have created environments that actually makes them feel at home, right? They are friendly, they are accessible, and it starts it starts at the front desk, or that first person they have contact with, right? So we have very intentionally made sure that whoever is the first person to have or establish a relationship with the families that we serve is someone that is actually able to spend the time to listen, to welcome, and understand really what their issues are. That's our primary focus. So that if anyone is taking notes and trying to learn how to build trust, with immigrant communities, I would have to say that the person you hire and the person that is the first face in communicating and interacting with families you are serving, it has to be someone that is competent, someone that understands immigrants, someone that speaks the language, someone that actually maybe was an immigrant, him herself, right? We have also engaged clients as community partners. We have used in the past human-centered design to actually come up with new programs. In about 3 years ago, actually, we did some of this work. We created a new program, which is called the Learning Cafe. And it's because we heard from the families that traditional English classes were not working for them. So a critical piece of making sure that there is a strong relationship with the families you serve, in this case, immigrants, is that you are really listening to their feedback, advice, ideas. So that's what we have done over the years. And in the remarks that I plan to make, in the next 5-10 minutes, are all related to making sure that you are always listening. As Sarah said before, I think that that's an opportunity, and it's one of the guiding principles, is making sure, their voice is heard. Programs include the family outreach approach. So we are out there having conversations with families at all time, trying to understand what their issues are. We use a coaching model versus the traditional case management model. So that means that we have staff members that meet with clients where they are, instead of imposing on them, specific and very rigid program models, right? We don't set the goals for the families. I think that Sarah sort of mentioned that before as well. parents and families, they know, well, they know better than us sometimes. They can actually, set those goals by themselves. We just have to help, the families to get to that goal setting process, and of course to reach and achieve those goals. Coaches provide guidance and resources. They don't make the clients feel, again, as I said before, that we know better. And staff, perhaps the most important element to build trust between the organization and families. So we have been extremely intentional, I could say, in terms of who we bring to Hispanic community. And by the way, values are critical. So if you have your set of values already established, good for you. If you still have to work on them, I encourage you to think about those values and have conversations across the board, whether it's board members, staff members, in terms of what those values mean, because we use the values to hire the people, that will provide services using that value system. So, and by the way, I want to acknowledge some of my colleagues. They are participating in this call. Thanks to them. They are including in those interviews some questions related to who we are and why serving immigrants, and just making sure that they share our values. So as I said before, and then the pandemic, we know millions of immigrants and mixed status families have been excluded from receiving federal assistance, right? So we, right after, the pandemic hit us, we came up with a very aggressive approach. We have everyone at Hispanic community reaching out to our clients. I have to tell you that we didn't wait for clients to start calling Hispanic community back in March 2020. And I think that was part of also building a stronger relationship, building trust. So we reach out to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of families to make sure someone was helping them. And if no one was, then Hispanic community immediately jumped into providing some assistance. So we got thousands of dollars that went straight to those families to pay for rent, mortgage, and other services. And by the way, it was based on their needs. Again, it's about making sure you're meeting their needs, making sure that as you listen, you are listening to what they need and how you can help them out. And we were extremely intentional because we said, for example, our youth development program, we're talking about TWICHN, we reach out to their parents. So we say we have been working with the children and the youth over the years. What about their parents? How can we make sure the entire family is okay? So we use the TWICHN approach, very intentional. So additional thoughts about that. Again, we focus on the entire family. We provide that emergency assistance, as we said before. We have adjusted our service delivery model. We knew the pandemic, was going to make even things worse for the families we serve. We came up with a different approach, a different model. We are not a health organization, but we set up a vaccination site. We know that many immigrants don't have IDs. They don't have access to COVID-19 vaccinations. And then we said, let's do it ourselves. It's part of building that trust as well. Results are extremely important. This is all prior to the pandemic. Our high school graduation rate, increased. Parents then started reaching some of those major economic development outcomes, including buying a house, securing better employment. And if I have to share one I guess, takeaway, is listen to them. Again, their voice is extremely important. Make sure that the voice is integrated into program design. And I really want to close my remarks by telling you about a process we started about a year and a half ago, and we just finished, and it's our two-chain mapping process. This map was intended to provide a clear direction to everyone at Hispanic community, and for the families to have a clear view of the process they would go through while being served by Hispanic community. Staff map the journey of those clients and families from the moment they express interest in our services until the moment they get enrolled. And after some time working on this journey map, directors determined and staff determined, by the way, that we needed to get into some conversations with clients. So we did something called, the empathy conversations with clients to gain a better understanding of their overall experience during their initial inquiry and contact with the organization. We wanted to get their input and make improvements to the way the Hispanic community can serve those families. For those conversations, we recruited several families. We conducted open conversations and we gained fantastic input that was built into the program design. More than the program design is the mapping of what the client goes through after actually inquiring some services. So a lot to talk again is just getting the feedback and making sure that you hire the right people to provide those essential services to immigrant families.
Thanks so much, Felipe. Great work you guys are doing, and Felipe will be joining back with us later when we bring all three of the agency speakers back for Q&A. So thank you for your presentation. It's now my pleasure to introduce Alece Montez as the Associate Chief of Family and Community Engagement for the Denver Public Schools. Alece.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you as well, Ascent and the Aspen Institute. The Denver Public Schools has been following Aspen's work for quite a long time. So some of what you'll hear today is built on the shoulders of others that we've learned through what we've gained insight from Aspen. And I'm speaking to you from a school district, the Denver Public Schools, and I would just like to give some context on how what we do is very similar to cities or towns or communities or neighborhoods across the US. We have about 90,000 students. And when you include the families, we're over 200,000. If you were a quasi-judicial entity. And so we do operate very much like our own small city or maybe a medium or large city. We have our own transportation, food services, planning, facilities. In that bigger district, I sit in an equity and engagement division where we have an intentional focus on our equity work and all of our different demographics and families. The predominant majority of our families, we have about 3% Asian American and Asian. We have Black and African American, which is about 14%. And we do specify a difference between Black and African American. We have a Black Excellence Resolution that means to lift up all of our Black students, but more specifically, diving even more into the multilingual learners. And so I saw one of the questions in the chat over there, how are we sort of differentiating? And so that's a little bit of how we're getting at that. We have about 52% Hispanic and 25% white with some smaller percents in other areas. We have English language learners is about 36% of our population. And about 36% of our population is Spanish speaking students as well. So different percentages, but they happen to align pretty closely. And our free and reduced lunch, so socioeconomic free and reduced lunch percentages is about 67% of our students. So that gives us a little bit more to work with in terms of not being able to use high-tech tools to engage with community and not always just doing surveys and expecting everyone to have a capacity to respond to those. In fact, when we do surveys that are electronic only, typically we find that it's our white middle-class families that are responding to those most often. And so a good lesson learned in how we've modified the ways that we gather input from our families. We have over 200 plus languages spoken at our district. The top are English, Spanish, Arabic, Vietnamese, Amharic, Somali, Nepali, French, Russian, and Burmese. And some challenges that we're facing as a district, because Denver is so expensive and you see the same sort of transition of what's happening across other major cities across the US, is gentrification, affordable housing. We certainly have a population boom with people with children that are moving away because it's so expensive to live here, or people that are choosing to wait to have children because it's so expensive to have children here. We're definitely seeing those numbers show like decrease in our numbers that are enrollment here at the district. And I think some of the other impacts that we're starting to see and take note of is with the climate crisis, air quality specifically. And when we think about here in Denver, I think we were just noted as like the worst in the world recently for our air quality with all of the fires we're facing. And we know that that impacts asthma, and a third of our chronic absences for school is from asthma. And when you have smoke like this, we're really worried about school starting, especially for our immigrant refugee families that don't always have good access to medical and health care. I think the other element too that we're seeing from climate crisis globally is certainly a growing number of refugees, immigrants, and migrants. We know that from the Marshall Islands, the water there is rising and the islands are starting to disappear. And we're seeing a lot more of our Marshallese population here in the Denver area. And so with that, I'll just name, we have a spectrum of ways that we've been welcoming and creating trust within the district for our immigrant and refugee families. And specifically, we follow a policies, practice, and mindsets model. And the first really around policies is how we set that environment that we know we need from a policy standpoint. And that really looks like we have the safe and welcoming resolution from the district. And that really, as a district, says that we're actively working to build trust with our community. I would say as well with that too, that the district shall do everything in its lawful power to protect our students' confidential information and ensure our students are in a learning environment that's not disrupted by immigration enforcement actions. We do provide training and support for our teachers and our school leaders that are out in community. And so that for us has been really critical. I think the other piece as well is around practice. One other thing with regard to policy and maybe some of the practice is how we, because of that last year with the pandemic, in trying to build strong relationships, which has really been key for us, is how do we do that in a really personalized way, that we created a personalized engagement initiative where we literally called thousands of families that we know we don't hear from to just check on them and see how they were doing. If they needed food, if they needed energy assistance support, if they needed clothing, and anybody else that they knew that might need that support. So we were making personal phone calls, and that was a huge effort that built quite a bit of trust with the district. And I will say that as a district, we have caused harm in the past by making decisions for people, to people, and having power over people. And so we have really been trying to shift the way that we do business and bringing community in through some of the practice work that we do. And so we actually have 5 newcomer centers in the district that support specifically our students, but we also have what we call FACE centers. They're family and community engagement centers that are nested in 2 schools in different areas within the Denver metro area. And those supports actually are for multi-generational families. So we see grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and the services are entirely free. And the fact that they're nested in the schools with our safe and welcoming policies, we have what feels like a little more trust with our community to come to the schools for these services. And with that, the services that we offer at the FACE centers are not just for DPS families, it goes beyond. And so anybody in the community can come and get the services there. The original idea from that, the staff had the idea, and we are always gap filling. As soon as we see that there's not a need met in community, we circle up and try to figure out how can we actually provide for that need by partnering with our over 500 partners in the Denver area. And so definitely that's another piece that we've done really well, and I think continue to learn how to do well, is how to utilize our partners and our partnerships, because we don't need to be the best at doing everything. We can partner with people that are. But in that setting up of our FACE centers, we conducted about 17,000 surveys and community conversations before we launched the centers to really understand what are the services that we should be offering community, which is important for us to connect with community to find that out rather than us sit back in our offices and think what we thought was the best to serve families. We went to them to ask. We continue to have those kinds of surveys and community conversations to make sure we're on par with what community needs. And what we heard is that families needed financial literacy classes, English classes, citizenship classes, and all of those come with free daycare. So when you come to the classes, we also provide mental health supports and a slew of other supports that we can connect with other partners from the FACE centers at. We also, during COVID, we learned that a lot of our immigrant and refugee communities were not eligible for the stimulus funds. And so we were able to secure the Left Behind Workers funds and connect with families that were undocumented, and were able to get some funding and supports in that way, as well as some rental assistance so that they weren't evicted until the eviction moratorium went into place. We also, from hearing from community, that they needed more access to mobile health clinics. So we actually have those, as well as interpreters in other languages that serve those health clinics. I think the other thing too is that we weren't really in the business of delivering food. We provided connections with partners for food, but in the pandemic, we absolutely saw a need from families, entire families that came down with COVID, that needed food and couldn't leave the house, or needed baby diapers, formula. We were literally providing door-to-door service food for our families, and we partnered with the Denver Metro Emergency Food Network to do that. I think we had over 50,000 free meals delivered to over 250 families. And so that was a big turn for us, and especially because a lot of our work was done in person, we had to immediately pivot to doing our work virtual, which was another story quickly I'll share, is that the district had purchased probably about 4,000 hotspots, and we shared them out with community, and we realized many of them were not getting turned on. And our team specifically jumped in and realized, well, we didn't provide any direction on how to use those hotspots. And so we did it through phone calls, through videos, like video phone calling, to kind of walk people through that. And so I think a couple of other final things I'll just note is that we also have an opportunity center that we're just launching now with our students who have just recently graduated. So we offer showers, food, professional clothing, and a myriad of services, which you can find in a resource document that we'll link here in a moment. I think ultimately for us, it's always been about building relationships, going to where people are, dwelling with them, celebrating with them, mourning with them. And as a mindset shift overall, which I'll leave maybe as finding like a closing in this, as a district, we actually all going through an equity experience together. So at some point, we will have 15,000 of our staff that go through an equity experience where we are learning about white supremacy culture and where our systems of oppression, so that we can be responsible for naming those and dismantling them. So that, I think, has been a huge element for us. And I think as far as advice, which I've sprinkled in throughout here, definitely building relationships and taking time to hear from community. One other quick piece I'll just say is we traditionally send all of our translation supports out to get our language services provided and all of our materials, but we were sending them out of country and it was missing the local dialect. And so there's a lot of things that you can do differently when you think about how in your own journey of trying not to be marginalizers, how can we make sure that we aren't marginalizing marginalized communities?
Thanks so much, Alece. A lot of great work again. And similar to Felipe, we look forward to diving more into particularly how you all have done some of the great work you described in the Q&A part. So the first two examples you heard from were centered in larger population areas in different parts of the country. We're now going to hear from Catholic Charities of Baton Rouge, which serves, even though it's in the technically based in the capital city of Louisiana, it actually serves a more rural population. And I'm going to navigate with them through some of their presentation. So I am pleased to introduce Vicki Malloyd, Early Childhood Program Manager with Catholic Charities of the Diocese of Baton Rouge, and Stephanie Sterling, Director of Family Services, Catholic Charities of the Diocese of Baton Rouge.
Thank you so much, Chris and the Aspen Institute for having us here today. We really appreciate the opportunity to share what we've done here in Louisiana.
Great. So let's start with a little bit of background about the place you guys work and describing who you all serve. Because again, when people hear Baton Rouge, they sort of would immediately assume the capital city footprint, LSU, but not necessarily rural.
Right. So our for Catholic Charities, Diocese of Baton Rouge covers 12 what we call in Louisiana are parishes. We're a little bit different. We don't call them counties. So we cover 12 civil parishes, which is a wide range of geography, which does include the city, but also many rural parts of our state. And because of that, as an organization, we try to make sure that we fill gaps in the community and serve our more underserved areas. And with that being said, we recognized many years ago that there was a great need for early childhood work in our rural areas. And we implemented the program HIPPY, Home Instruction for the Parents of Preschool Youngsters. And HIPPY is one of about 30 different programs that we have at Catholic Charities Baton Rouge. And those programs range from adoption to behavioral health services, immigration legal services, refugee resettlement, prison reentry, direct assistance, housing for lower income families, and English as a second language. We are a nonprofit here and have been doing the work for about 56 years. So HIPPY is the program that we're here to talk about today. It's a completely two-generation approach and whole family approach program. I saw someone in the chat mention a whole family. And it's a home visitation program that is evidence-based, and it's for parents of preschoolers, so children ages 2 to 5. It's a curriculum that is gets the children ready to enter kindergarten, and also helps the parents more intentionally and qualitatively engage with their children. And what we know when parents more intentionally engage with their children, that the protective factors in the home increase. And that's one of the beautiful parts about HIPPY that oftentimes we might not necessarily hear about. And those kind of things that we see and we have seen, especially through the pre and post testing that we do, such as the outcomes for children and adults. We have outcomes for both children and adults in our HIPPY program, and the adults in the home. And protective factors is one of those. School readiness is another, behavioral health is another. So I'm really glad to see some of the other agencies talk about the need for behavioral health and how there's a mistrust of the behavioral health services for immigrants in the past. And so because of that, we have a bilingual licensed clinical social worker that our staff can do a warm handoff to. So just to give you a little bit of information about the folks that we serve, about 30% of our clients in the HIPPY program are immigrants. And one of the things that we did a few years ago was we were able to obtain some funding from an organization, a foundation here in Baton Rouge, in order to hire a bilingual home visitor. And that home visitor is from the community that she serves. So there's a built-in trust. What I love about HIPPY, or one of the things that I love about HIPPY, is that we use home visitors from the community. And that doesn't, it doesn't matter if you are an immigrant or Spanish speaking or African American or Caucasian. We hire the home visitors from the community. So it doesn't have to be an outside expert who's coming in to deliver a service. The person that is delivering the service is really the expert in their community about their community, and they're already trusted. 3/4 of our home visitors are former hippie parents. They're already vested. They already know that the program works. And so they're excited about it. They're excited to show the families how they can teach their children and how they can get them ready to enter school and be prepared for kindergarten. All of the materials for Hippie can be purchased. The curriculum it can be purchased in Spanish as well as English. So the family gets to decide if they want the materials, and the books, all of the books as well are in Spanish. They get to decide, do they want the Spanish version or the English version? And that is, also an example of having a family voice. One of the things I really liked about what Alece said earlier is that they did check-ins on their families at the start of COVID. And that was something that we immediately implemented when the shutdown started 18 months ago, was check-ins. And Vicki will tell you a little bit more about how we pivoted our services. I'll just tell you a little bit more before that about some of the outcomes that we've been able to achieve with our bilingual home visitor that we hired. So over the past 2 years, our home visitor, the bilingual home visitor we hired, was able to serve over 41 families. And with those 41 families, she was able to provide 1,836 home visits. 87% of the children that she served and the families that she served, they improved on their school readiness assessment. So there's many outcomes that are, attribute to the parents and to the children, and it all points to improving and increasing the family functioning, the knowledge of child development for the parents, increasing their social and concrete supports, and also the nurturing and attachment, as what we know is so important for child development.
Thanks, Stephanie. Vicki, let's have you talk a little bit more about the services and how it works itself.
Okay, well, one of the things with the services, we had some issues. One of our primary issues were the safety concerns of the families due to their immigration status and the continued language, trying to communicate through language barriers. But we addressed that issue, as Stephanie stated, by hiring a bilingual home visitor who was also an immigrant, and she lived in the community in which she served. So because of this, the trust was quickly established, and we were able to move past that. COVID-19 impacted our immigrant families financially. That was the biggest impact, because they could not receive the state and federal social services such as SNAP and unemployment insurance, and many of the immigrant families also work service jobs, which was hit the hardest. But we provide financial assistance to them through housing payments, rent payments, utility payments, food and gas cards. And we also provided material goods such as diapers and formula and wipes. And to be honest, the material goods was, I guess, the most demanded items that they asked for. And in doing that, a level of trust was increased because we provided those financial supports and those supports, direct supports to our families. And I can say that because when we started opening up group meetings, when the numbers decreased, we had an increase of immigrant families coming to our parent meetings than we did before. And I've also had just interactions in the community. When I see them in public, we now, hello, have conversate with each other when we're in the store and going about our ways. So another way our families were impacted is because we're so rural, we don't have internet access, well, adequate internet access. So it challenged the remote learning as well as some of the virtual functions that we were trying to do to establish our service. And also deterred the hybrid method. We utilized the hippie home visiting method and implement a hybrid home visiting formula in which we would go into the homes one week and then we will also do virtual home visiting the next week so we could be efficient and effective with our methods. And some of the supports we had in the communities from businesses were from local businesses. We, Catholic Charities, Diocese of Baton Rouge was one of 9 agencies that were trained in a 2-generational approach by Catholic Charities USA. We partner with the local school districts. As I stated, the local businesses and county boards, such as police juries. We also partnered with a local diaper bank and local church groups.
Thank you so much. I look forward to bringing you all back with the other speakers when we dive into the Q&A. Thank you much for being here and sharing your stories. And it's my pleasure to introduce Margie McHugh, who is Director of the National Center on Immigrant Integration Policy at the Migration Policy Institute. And Margie and I are going to talk a little bit about what we've heard and try to identify some themes. And I think particularly, I guess, Margie, I'll start with, we've heard many important issues and approaches from these 3 organizations. Any common themes or reflections that you heard across program approaches that you'd like to underscore?
Yeah, I have so many notes. It's great to hear all the presentations. I guess I would just say from the outset that our shop would put, almost everything that was talked about by the 3 terrific speakers under a heading of integration, meaning, what does it take? The way the federal government has started to define it is linguistic, economic, and civic integration. But there's just so many different types of knowledge that are involved for a family to be able to be on an upward integration trajectory. And so I'm just going to use those words a little bit in terms of what I heard. And of course, it makes me a little mad to think of how much work these 3 groups are doing to do work that is totally recognized. For example, in the refugee resettlement space, it would be called cultural orientation, or, but we used to joke when I worked with a lot of groups that were local service providers in my old job in New York, that everyone was working till 10 at night and on weekends to try and address integration needs, but like only getting funding for like 2 particular kinds of services. So hats off to all 3 of the providers for really thinking about how to be so versatile in being able to address so many needs, even though they're just funded, to do very discrete services very often. So my ear was totally catching that that you have to juggle and be smart about either providing yourself or providing referrals that are really good referrals, to folks who can really help you. And then the second part of that, which I don't think Felipe maybe said as much about, but I know that Hispanic Unity, DPS, and Catholic Charities generally all really understand the immigration status issues that are involved in being to access different programs. And so, if you think about just all of the typical kinds of supports that are normally things that folks will say, well, you need help with this. Well, access TANF, or why aren't you on Medicaid? You know, there's so many different ins and outs for families based on immigration status that I thought you could hear it in what they were saying. But, you know, the whole, like, what kind of training does that take for staff? And, you know, how do you really make that happen, I think is a really important piece of the work they're all doing. And then there was a lot in the chat about language and languages in addition to Spanish. And I guess I would say, you know, it's a whole other kind of, I don't know, window into reality, but in so many places like Denver, you know, that used to be considered like a secondary destination, you know, that now has, you know, almost 200 languages or more spoken in their school district. The issues around super diversity and truly creating equity in access, it's a real pressure for frontline providers to try and figure out. It really is technically a federal civil rights responsibility for anybody that receives federal funding to be doing it. But we always joke that it's a thou shalt, you know, thou shalt figure out how to provide services, you know, make your services open to folks who speak 200 languages. But yet, if you look at RFPs or the ways that all these different programs that that we'd be talking about, you know, over the course of this webinar series, are there really RFP processes? And as we think about equity, if we're in a moment around equity, you know, are we really figuring out how to help organizations that are really doing the work to hire the staff that speak these languages, or to make sure that they have the translation and interpretation assistance available? You know, it's something that we kind of have come to think that, you know, it happens by magic, but it is really hard work for organizations to do it. And, you know, I just think it's a good practice issue to really figure out as part of the peer learning with our series, you know, how are folks really making that happen? Because it's the essential building block of trust. How are you going to trust anybody that, like, you know, can't speak to you? Never mind all the things that opens up about what are the issues you come that you might want to, you know, be talking about and addressing.
Yeah, and just a note for those of you who don't know, the acronym RFP is a request for proposals that funders put out. And I think noting that while people are mandated to serve multiple languages, they really aren't often recognized in funding opportunities to do that. So, and all three groups talked about the importance of the COVID pandemic and sort of how dramatic it was for immigrants. And so I wanted to ask you about that, sort of what has COVID meant for immigrant families and communities?
Well, you know, I would say that, gosh, if this isn't a moment to really recognize the inequities that are being experienced by immigrant families, you know, with what we saw during the in the initial stages, in particular of the pandemic, just how eye-opening it was to understand sort of the, you know, the who was really being impacted. Folks who were facing already health disparities, essential workers, low paid work that was not a regular schedule, and, you know, all of these things that actually, to me, are a complete two-gen or multi-generational issue that we're recognizing that, you know, school has moved to remote instruction, and how are we going to make that work? And we're just assuming that someone is going to be at home and be able to supervise a child's instruction and get them online. And just, you could see the ripple effect of all the things that weren't in place, especially for immigrant families. And so I really have hope, and I think organizationally we've tried to think a lot about that at our center, that if there really is going to be a serious effort to build back stronger and to address equity gaps, well, then we need to start recognizing the characteristics, the challenges that families are facing. And so, I mean, we just put out in April a whole analysis that looked at it specifically because of the school issues and how much money is coming down to schools. How can we understand the relevant characteristics of parents of kids in the early childhood space, ages 0 to 4, kids who were in elementary school. You know, you could argue that middle and high school kids often have better digital access, digital literacy skills. They didn't need their parents necessarily. Don't be mad at me, parents of middle school kids who like you had to sit with them and keep them online too. But I would just say for really young kids and for elementary school kids, it was absolutely a given that a parent had to sit with them to have them participate. And so, you know, if you're thinking about families who are essential workers with irregular work schedules, more subject to health disparities, and potentially limited English proficient in a linguistically isolated household, digital access to digital literacy challenges. Why aren't we counting these? Why aren't we using data that shows us these characteristics moving forward? If it's really going to mean anything to move forward in a more equitable way, I think we really need to understand who the population is, and be giving responsive programming to them. You know, so God, I mean, it was wonderful of school districts that gave out Chromebooks, but then yes, the secondary piece of that is there actually an affordable plan, you know, that the family has for that kind of digital service? Do they have do the parents or the kids have the digital access and digital literacy to be accessing the complex platforms? Often in one family, you'd have 3 different platforms being used by, you know, the different schools that the kids were in for their learning. You know, just lots of ways that things broke down. And so I know a few things are being put in the chat. I mean, we're really worried about the equity agenda going forward from this, because it was not just immigrant families, but also dual language learner young kids, as well as English learners in K-12, whose education was most heavily impacted because of how difficult it is to move English language learner instruction online. And so we think there's just an enormous policy agenda moving forward from there. And we know a lot of money is coming to school districts, and hopefully folks will use data and a lot of these arguments to have the money sort of move towards some of these obvious equity gaps. There's also a big advancing equity executive order at the federal level, so hopefully federal agencies will recognize this more. But you know, all of these things that I just spoke about, they're the foundation to build trusting relationships. You know, it's recognizing are the issues facing families, not coming at them with, as Sarah was saying earlier, hey, come enroll in my, you know, career and technical ed program, when, you know, you're facing such daily survival issues. It's a real difficult game.
So I want to get one more question to you, and then we're going to quickly kind of pivot into the Q&A and bring the speakers back in. But obviously, there was a lot of talk about immigration policy in the previous administration, and certainly there's a lot of talk about the changes at the federal level under the Biden administration. What trends or major policies under the Biden administration might make a real difference in the ability of local organizations to build trust with immigrant families?
Yeah, it's a very different environment now from a policy perspective with the Biden administration coming in. You're right about that, and I would say the first issue that probably is maybe most pertinent for folks listening in from a service provider perspective is this public charge rule. It's a part of immigration law that says if you're deemed to be likely to be dependent on public programs, then you know, that's an issue under immigration law. You might not be able to be petitioned in by a family member, et cetera, et cetera. So when the Trump administration went hard after that provision of law to try and really make it much more exacting, apply more broadly and the like, that created a real, you know, you just saw overnight. I don't need to say this probably to folks on the phone that, you know, who are providing services. It had a massive chilling effect. And I think it's one of the first things that the Biden administration tried to address when they came in. They rolled back a few of the rules. They're trying to nail down the more permanent rule, have it only apply to some of the actual cash assistance programs and the like. But I think the progress on that is something that has been really important. There is a lot of talk, even in the budget reconciliation package, that the broad outlines have just been broadly agreed to try and get some immigration legalization measures within that. It might, I think the priority populations that folks are talking about now are DACA youth and the and farm workers. There's hopes around moving it out towards some essential workers and the like. But if there were to be some legalization measures, I think that would also be a major victory for this administration and would go a long way to addressing some of the trust and the status issues that happen within families, make it harder for folks to want to come forward and have their names, addresses, their kids' names and addresses in any kind of a database. And I think one other thing, related to the equity focus of the administration that might be one of the things they can make more of an impact in could be really looking at language assistance services. And I say this with the early childhood kind of focus that I know a lot of folks working in this space have, because the field often doesn't have the workforce to start with to be working competently and responsibly with immigrant and refugee families. And part of that really is thinking about super diversity and how to be in people's homes and speaking the languages of families and sharing the culture. So I think that we might see more out of the administration that would hopefully really communicate to the early childhood field that, these requirements, especially with all the new money that's going into potentially childcare, maybe universal pre-K, that maybe there'll be more of a focus on the field needing to value programs like the ones we just heard from, who are really making the effort to respond to the the language needs of the families that they're attempting to serve. And that if we begin to value that more, I think that it just will make a huge difference in terms of the ability of immigrant families to be kind of in this realm of two-generation or multi-generational programming, because right now there's just really not I think especially in a context of super diversity, there's just not a lot of linguistic cultural competence when you get to the door of the actual service. There's lots of outreach flyers in multiple languages, but when you get to the door of the service, we just haven't put in what's needed to have the competence that's required.
Thanks, Margie. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you to stay on, and we're going to bring our speakers back. And I'm going to note that we've been joined by Lindsay McNicholas, who's Executive Director for Family Engagement, Strategy and Development with the Denver Public Schools. And again, as folks have noted, if you have specific questions, we've got a little less time than we were hoping for because there's so much great content, but we do want to have a chance to follow up with questions with each of you. If we were in person, we'd all kind of be on a stage on chairs together, kind of having a discussion. But since we're doing this Zoom world, you'll have to visualize that, and we'll try to have sort of a dialogue about this. Felipe, I wanted to start with you and follow up, if you can, on one quick piece of work that you all did that I wanted you to talk a little bit more about, which was the work you did to create a kind of single port of entry and sort of a holistic approach to how you changed your programs from sort of silos that worked with immigrants into much more of an integrated system. If you could talk briefly about sort of how you guys did that, I think that's an important learning opportunity for folks working with immigrants.
Absolutely, Chris. I can tell you that back in 2008, we looked at some data across programs, realized that clients were coming back for the same services 3 months later, right? Like employment. So we realized we were not accomplishing what we wanted to. Reach out to some key partners across the nation, including the Casey Foundation. Good to see you, Rosa Maria. And then, of course, we brought the Center for Working Families to Hispanic community. That was, I guess, the first time we started integrating services, including, of course, public benefits, the workforce piece, placement, and workforce education, as well as financial education, housing, small business ownership. And that was the first time we did it. Tons of lessons learned that I can share at some point. At the same time, we also realized that the after-school programs, we had a Hispanic community, shouldn't only focus on academics. So we started also bundling services, including case management, prevention services, enrichment activities. And that was the first time that actually we thought about how important it was for us to also reach out to the parents. And we're talking about 2008, 2010. And as the years progressed, we also figured out that we were not moving at the pace we needed to move to sort of address some of the equities Margie was talking about, that we said we have to do something more aggressive. And then that's when we decided to reach out to Ascend and implemented our 2-gen approach. And what we did is that we started having both departments, education and economic development, working together, integrating services. I have to tell you, it's a very difficult work to do, as you guys know. Breaking those silos, within the organization is extremely difficult. But then we were very intentional. We created very, meetings, conversations on a regular basis. And I'm not talking about management team. We're talking about staff across the board. We brought best practices, we provided training, and we are at the point that we also realized that we needed to sort of change systems within the agency, including our how the client goes through services, and that's why we did the mapping. And now we are actually making some further decisions so we can continue integrating services, but extremely excited about the progress we have made, and at the same time excited about so much work that we still make sure we can serve those families.
Thank you. Alece and Lindsay, I wanted to bring you guys in to talk a little bit. You noted the recognition you all had around translation services and finding folks in the community. And I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about how you recognize that problem, how you found those people, and sort of what you saw as the impact, both programmatically, but also just from a trust building perspective of having those sort of culturally appropriate translators working with your families.
Real just briefly, I think we do have an Asian community coordinator that is very well networked with our Vietnamese community specifically. And it was a few times there when notices would go out about meetings or information was shared that community was either not showing up or they'd show up with a lot of questions about what did we really need about the flyers that we had distributed or information we'd shared. And then it became really clear that some of the language that we were using was quite traumatic for some of our community, and because it had some of the pre-war, post-war associations with it. And so Lindsay, maybe I'll have you share more about what we're doing, work with our Asian community coordinator and getting some local support.
Sure, yeah. So in the learning from that, we took it to the community and wanting to repair that relationship as being intentional there and connecting with community members who can either review documents or help with translation, paying them for that service as well, knowing that again, we're not experts in all areas, and we have expertise in our community, and we want to tap into that. And so it goes back to this doing with and not to model, and really listening and learning from the community. And so that's part of the effort here, is bringing those translation services directly into the community so that we don't have those errors moving forward. And if we do, then we correct it.
Thank you. Vicki and Stephanie, I wanted to talk with you, ask you guys a little bit about, given the rural population you all serve, which is really different in the sense of, in the case of Hispanic Unity in the Denver Public Schools, there's a kind of central place that people come in a high population area to come. You all have to, I think, find your people a little more. And I'm wondering how you identify as you work over the footprint that you guys serve. How do you find the immigrant families for your hippie program? And how is that the bilingual visitors sort of been instrumental in kind of building trust so that you could find where immigrant families were and they would want to be a part of the HIPPY program?
Well, the immigrant population has always been a part of the HIPPY program, but we had an increase once we hired our bilingual home visitor. She was also a immigrant family and a HIPPY parent. So she was a part of the community. So therefore she recruited within the community. So the clients she served are people that, you know, she knows and I guess share the same values and traditions and culture.
One of the things, yeah, I do want to add to that, Chris. One of the things that also helped in building that trust or establishing that trust is our home visitor was also an interpreter for the school system, a Spanish interpreter for the school system. So she was also able to advocate for families in a way that they were not able to advocate for themselves because of the language barrier. So they had a built-in trust for her before she even became a HIPPY home visitor.
So one question I want to ask all of you, and I'll start with Stephanie and Vicki, is a number of folks had mentioned in the chat, we talked about sort of working with parents and children, but in many families, it's multi-generational. Not all immigrant families come with multi-generational, but certainly folks over time, you're not just dealing with parents as important contacts with the family, but often grandparents or grandparents may be raising grandchildren. So I wondered if you all would talk a little bit, and we'll start with you and Stephanie and Vicki. How have you incorporated or dealt with this sort of broader, more whole family approach versus just a kind of classic parent-child targeting of your program work?
Well, one of the ways we incorporate that is when we have our parent meetings, we call them family meetings. The family or whoever complete the activities with the child or is involved in the child life, they're welcome to attend our meetings, you know, to get tips and whatever the topic may be for that month. As well as we have a lot of grandparents that complete the packets, complete the curriculum with the child. So grandparents are very involved. As if the parents are working, the grandparents may take over that job and duty for the family. So, you know, we welcome it.
Thank you. Alece and Lindsay?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I'll start here with our FACE centers, our family and community engagement centers that Alece referenced. A multi-generation model is at the core of the design. It's from the start of our programming almost 10 years ago was about multi-generation supports. We have grandparents, aunts, uncles, friends, families, neighbor network coming and participating in the resources and services that are at the centers. And that's really integral to what we see in our student success, because we know it may not just be that the parent or the neighbor, but there are many different adults in a child's life that impact them. And when they see all of those adults participating in the resources or the services that are available through our work within family and community engagement, that's where we see that impact and we see those gains in their academic achievement. Because they have those models in their family or with their neighbor or with their friend's neighbor down the street that they've been connected to somehow, some way. That's really a key piece of it, and that's where we've been listening and learning to you all with the Aspen Institute over the course of the past decade here.
Yeah, and Alece, did you want to add to that, or?
I would just reinforcing, and I think every speaker has touched on this, like the need to really connect with people. And, we do a lot of training at the district for our school leaders on how to do good engagement. We have a parent-teacher home visit program where we train our teachers how to go into the homes and what to expect and how to do that. And so it's not a skill we're born with, and it's something that I think is helpful to seek out training and how to do good engagement with communities, especially communities that are not of our dominant mainstream. There are nuances and there are biases that we can walk into that with, and that are really important to be aware of, self-aware before you walk into engagement and working with families.
Thanks. And I wanted to note, I thought one of the key parts of the work you guys were doing with your translators was to recognize that you all pay them for and treat them as a professional services. And I know you all do that in Baton Rouge as well, and Felipe and Tama, because often people tap resources sometimes without reimbursement. And it's important to have that kind of both support for the folks who are bringing their expertise. So Felipe, we'll close with you and talk a little bit about how you all deal with that sort of multi-generational whole family dynamic in your two-gen approach.
Chris, I think that we have plenty of experience working with multi-generational families, including grandmas and grandpas taking care of their grandchildren. But what really matters is having an understanding of what the family needs, what their needs are, right? So that's how we have programs that are actually targeting specifically those generations, including our citizenship program. If you come to class, you will see 55 and older, most of the time 60 and older, because that's exactly what they're looking for, right? They want to become US citizens. So what we do is that we customize the program, we tailor a project, to make sure that we meet their needs. But they also need access to health insurance as well as employment services. Unfortunately, very unfortunately, many of the seniors that come to our center were professionals in their countries of origin, and now they have to work, basic entry-level jobs. So it's just making sure that we understand what they need and then customize those services to make sure that we meet the needs of the entire family. That is including, of course, people beyond parents and children.
Thank you. So we have run up against time. I want to thank you all for sharing your expertise and stories with us. I want to note that one of the other pieces that we will be doing is writing briefs that summarize each of the organizations that you heard from today with some case studies about their work, as well as some broader takeaways from other interviews, other organizations we interviewed, all centered around sort of how they have their work and strategies on trust building. And Margie is a part of those briefs and will be connecting those to policy implications. It's a reminder that if you had questions for Sarah or I about Aspen's work, or Margie about my MPI's work, this is their contact info. Again, to remind folks that if you're interested in the peer learning session that we're doing, it's August 26th. And again, the link is in the chat box. We would love to have you ask a question, or again, folks can attend and be a part of the dialogue and hopefully learn. All of our speakers today will be a part of the experts dialoguing directly with the question askers. Please complete an evaluation when you get it for this webinar. It helps us. As we said, we've got 3 more in this series to do, and your feedback is really critical. We thank all of you for attending. We had a great turnout today, and more folks who we expect will be watching this. And again, a reminder that this has been videotaped and will be available on our website, and we will have links on Aspen CSG's website to all the materials that were discussed in the chat, and information about each of these organizations. So thank you for your time, and we hope we see you again in a month as we move to the next theme, and hope some of you will be joining us with our peer learning session on the 26th. Thank you very much.